Let's see. All right. It looks like the recording has started, so I'll go ahead and kick things off. Welcome, everyone. I know we'll probably have a few people filtering in, but let's go ahead and get started. I am Evan Tackett on the product marketing team here at Quest, and I am really excited for this tech talk with Curtis and Habib. I know over the last few years, I've gotten to see them present several times, and there's always a lot of really great content that comes out of the presentations. A few housekeeping points. This is a Teams meeting, so we love doing these in Teams meetings because the chat is always really great, and we hope for a lot of engagement with you guys, the attendees. If you do have questions, you are welcome to drop them in the chat, and Curtis and Habib will probably get to them as they come in, or we may end up fielding them towards the end, but. We also have Jason Morano and Rich Hansen on to help make sure that questions get answered. But, you may see a few useful articles being shared too. So, make sure to take a look at those when you have some time. But, if you want to ask any questions yourself, you're welcome to raise your hand too, and we can make sure to take you off mute. But, otherwise, just enjoy. I think I'll go ahead and hand things over to Curtis and Habib now, though. Go ahead and take it away, guys.
All right, thanks, Evan, and welcome everybody to this Tech Talk, boosting your Microsoft 365 administration and security with AI. So my name is Curtis Johnstone. I'm a distinguished engineer with Quest Software. I work in our Microsoft business unit, and I'm also a Microsoft 365 apps and services MVP. So I help build the great products here at Quest, including our migration tools, our audit tools, and all the Quest on-demand SaaS tools that you may be familiar with. I also co-host a podcast with Habib and a couple other MVPs. Habib, why don't you tell us a little more about that podcast and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Curtis. Habib Mankel, Principal Architect of Wavecore IT. I'm also a Microsoft 365 Apps and Services MVP. Yeah, as Curtis mentioned, we have a podcast with 4 Canadian Microsoft MVPs. It's called o365a.com because we're Canadian, and we'll throw that link in the chat as well for you folks. But moving along here, we want to talk a little bit about our agenda with regards to today. So we want to start off by level setting, the audience with regards to, what should you be thinking about from a AI perspective as a M365 administrator and using security as well. Introduction into LLMs, which is our large language models and AI, and then provide obviously some of the top 4 tools that are out there today. Obviously, there's a lot more large language models in the past 6 months that have been created. Obviously, one of the big topics is privacy and security concerns, so what you have to think about with regards to that. And then just a couple of points, how to get started if you haven't been using these large language models. What is a prompt? How do you perform some prompt engineering? I guess we'll call it a 101. And then just some things to look forward to as you move along in your road, using these LLMs and AI, right? Then after that, we're going to break into a couple of scenarios and some demos just to show some, real live action of the tool as well. So with that, Curtis, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the ability to leverage M365 and AI?
Sure. Thanks, Habib. So AI is all the rage. There's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of tools, a lot of different things you can do with it. But what Habib and I noticed back when we put this presentation together is no one's taken a step back and looking at if you're a Microsoft 365 administrator, an IT pro, or you're responsible for a tenant, which of course includes making sure that it's secure. No one's really looked at how to use popular AI tools like Chat GPT, Microsoft Copilot to boost your administration, to make you more effective. So we took a fresh look at how to use these tools to help with that. And if there's one thing you walk away from in this presentation, it's practical ways that you can use the tools that are available to help with that. So what are the ways that these tools can help you be more productive and accelerate your journey along just owning and managing a Microsoft 365 tenant? So these are the four ways, the four top ways we determined were the best candidates for using these tools. So let's walk through them now. Number one, accelerating the how-to. So if you're responsible for a tenant for delivering Microsoft 365 services like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, whether you're in the technical weeds, you're figuring out how to configure that service, or you're just responsible for delivering the service, a good part of your day is figuring out how to configure something a certain way, how to figure out how to deliver the service in a safe way that meets your business needs. And the how-to is an interesting one because it's very scenario dependent. It depends on what licensing you have, what features are enabled, what capabilities you want to deliver to your users. And with traditional search, like a Google search or a Bing search, it can take a lot of time to figure out how to configure something, how to troubleshoot something, how to deliver a specific type of experience for those M365 workloads. So this is where the AI tools like Chat GPT and Microsoft Copilot can be a huge boost. And why is that? Because these chat AI bots, you can have a contextual conversation. You can tell the Chat GPT bot, for example, what your exact context is. You can tell it what license types you have. You can tell it what exactly you're looking for or what problem you have. And then once it sets that context, you can keep asking it questions. And I found it very, very useful, and it's really boosted my ability to figure out issues in my tenant. And it can do the same for you in terms of how to deliver those services. Next up, you can use these AI tools as a co-pilot for scripting or developing certain configuration scenarios. And specifically Microsoft 365, a lot of IT pros use PowerShell. I've used PowerShell extensively throughout the last 5, 7, 8 years. And one of the most time-consuming tasks is developing a script from scratch, which does X, Y, and Z. These AI tools are fantastic at producing that initial script. And we'll emphasize throughout this presentation, you should never just have it generate a script and use it without understanding it. But the time saved of getting that initial PowerShell script or script language of your choice is a huge, huge time saver. And it's also really good to for debugging scripts. So if anyone on the call has authored a lengthy PowerShell script, it's very easy to make a mistake, not use a variable correctly. What you can do is you can provide the script to the Chat GPT or Microsoft Copilot tool, and then tell it exactly what the problem is. And it's pretty good at identifying what the issue is, which saves you tons of time. Next up, end user communication. If you're an IT pro or a Microsoft 365 tenant administrator, you're probably really consumed with all the details, all the technical bits of trying to deliver the service. But at the end of the day, we need to communicate to the end users what's being delivered. And that often gets lost in IT departments, just the quality of that end user communication. You can use these AI tools to actually generate good end user communication content. Again, you can describe your specific context, what capabilities you're delivering, and then have it generate that initial end user communication. And then you can have a conversation with the AI bot. You can tell it, summarize it, make it simpler, make it longer, describe this specific capability better. You can even use an AI tool to critique your existing end user communication. You can just copy it into the AI bot and have it recommend, give you recommendations on things like clarity, or even translate it to another language. Lastly, living in the tech world that we live in today, things are changing rapidly. And you can use these AI bots to help keep your learning up to speed. And even you can use them to help train you to take certification tests. So you can tell it, for example, you're training for a specific Microsoft certification. You can have it ask you questions to test your understanding. And what's really good, I've found, is working in technology. There's a lot of complex concepts. You can have the AI bot break it down in simple language for you to gain a greater understanding of what you're trying to learn and how it applies to end users and the people that consume the services. So with that, those are the 4 big ways you can leverage these AI tools to boost your Microsoft 365 administration. Anything to add there, Habib?
No, I mean, I think it's a really great start to the conversation.
Great.
All right, so let's level set a little bit here around sort of AI essentials. You know, what is a large language model? All right, it's essentially, you know, I guess a group of, or a massive supercomputer farm, mainly using GPUs. I think there are some new large language models that, you know, are able to use CPUs for processing, but basically they're trained with an immense amount of data, right? So a lot of it's just in text format, and basically makes it, you know, them very capable of understanding like all the natural language processing and stuff like that you do. And so they have deep learning algorithms that can recognize certain things, translate, predict, generate content on a very large data set very, very quickly. So as I mentioned, you know, what are they really good at? Primarily, they're really good at translating natural language. So as we speak, when we talk to the AI, and we'll talk about, you know, how to create some prompts a little bit further on, how does it convert that into the language it understands to return the appropriate, you know, values or information that you're requesting? It's also good at predicting things that you're going to start typing. You probably even notice some of the generative AI side of things as well, is like, you know, when you're typing in Outlook now and it starts generating all the new things that it thinks you're going to say, and you can just hit tab to continue on using that appropriate text. So as Curtis mentioned, you know, it's really good at producing scripts when you first, you know, start out as an administrator. It gives you a really good starting point with regards to summarization, researching, even, you know, obviously with the Microsoft or Copilot for Microsoft 365, producing actual, you know, or curating actual text and context and presentations in PowerPoint as well. And then also, you know, using them or using these LLMs and chatbots. So you'll notice, like when you go to some websites, a lot of these websites could now be backed by these LLMs that are trained for their product or whatever the website is sort of hosting. To be able to answer your questions and so on. So, you know, these are some of the ways or, you know, what these large language models are and some of the little ways that you can use them as an organization. So Curtis, I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit more to that, or if you want to jump into, you know, some of the toolkits that you can use.
No, you described it well. And I'll clarify one thing that a lot of people don't understand is the difference between the AI bot, the tool, and the large language model. The large language model, like Habib said, is trained on a large corpus of data, and it's just really good at translating natural language queries. And then the AI bot tool, something like Chat GPT, that AI bot uses the large language model along with other data sources to answer your question, to respond to your prompt. So probably the most popular large language model out there is GPT, and probably one of the most popular chat AI bots is Chat GPT. So Chat GPT is the bot, GPT is the large language model, which is a good segue into our next slide. What are the popular AI tools you can use for Microsoft 365 administration and security? So Habib and I have some experience using different ones, and we've sort of nailed it down to these 4 buckets of tools. First up, of course, Chat GPT, which is released by OpenAI, which is a separate, for-profit company. Microsoft has a significant investment in them. And they basically have 2 versions of their tool available. There's a free version, and then there's a plus version. We'll talk about some of the differences in the next slide. But next up is Microsoft Copilot. So this is the artist formerly known as Microsoft Enterprise Bing. It was renamed about 6 months ago to the Microsoft Copilot branding. And just to be 100% clear, when we talk about Microsoft Copilot in this context, we're talking about the web interface you can use to have AI-assisted search, not to be confused with Microsoft Copilot for M365, which is the AI-infused experience in all the Microsoft 365 applications. So one of the benefits you'll see with Microsoft Copilot is you can use the latest large language model, GPT-4. It's integrated in that experience. And then the third tool we'll talk about is an Azure OpenAI service, which is it's basically an Azure service which runs in your Azure subscription. And as you'll see, it has some benefits. And then the 4th bucket of tools is just a catch-all for all the other AI tools that are out there and services. And there's thousands of them now. And whatever works for you in terms of boosting your Microsoft 365 administration is great. But we'll talk about some privacy and security concerns in a couple of slides from now. But two other tools that catch our eye is, first of all, there's a PowerShell AI module by Microsoft MVP Doug Finke, and I think it's open source. And so this allows you to use the AI tools right in your PowerShell. So if you do a lot of PowerShell and you want to use these large language models in your PowerShell script, that's a really good option, especially if you're doing a lot of automation and you can really leverage those AI tools. And another one is Bard by Google. It's very similar to the OpenAI Chat GPT experience. We haven't seen huge advantages either way, but I think Habib and I have used Chat GPT more, and we've had really, really good experiences with it. So with that, let's just take it a layer deeper on what tool would you use, what sort of the trade-offs you make. And this slide is more a reference slide. Don't try to digest all of it, but if you are looking at different tools for Microsoft 365 administration, along the top, you sort of have the 6 considerations that you'll want to give thought to when you use a tool. And then the first column on the left are the 4 buckets of tools that we just talked about. So I'll just pick out a couple of key comparisons. Of course, when you use any tool, cost comes in the equation. Again, for OpenAI Chat GPT, there's 2 flavors. There's a free version, and then there's a plus version, which last time I checked was $20 US per month. The big difference there is the free version of Chat GPT gives you access to the large language model GPT 3.5, which is a bit older. Its corpus of data that it was trained on is up till September 2021. So that is coming close to 2.5 years old. So, for administration use cases, you'll probably want the latest and greatest GPT-4 if your use case has anything that requires sort of up-to-date information. So that plus version is it was trained on a whole data set up to June 2023, plus they do incremental updates. So I'll give you the latest and greatest. Then there's the Microsoft Copilot equivalent, and there's 2 flavors of Microsoft Copilot, which again is the former enterprise Bing search. There's a consumer and an enterprise version. So a consumer version is just you're logging in with your personal consumer account. So that would be a Outlook.com or a Hotmail identity. where the enterprise version is you're logging in with your work account. So whatever Azure AD identity you use for work, you're logging in to the service with that identity. Both are great. The thing I really like about the Microsoft Copilot experience is it's essentially free, although the consumer version you'll see in limitations on the right-hand side. You're limited to the number of characters daily, the number of tokens, which boils down to the number of prompts you can do. But what's nice is you'll see there's a slider in the Copilot experience where you can do Chat GPT 3.5, which is the default, or you can just slide it across and use GPT-4, which will give you that up-to-date information. Both OpenAI and Microsoft Copilot are great options for quick Microsoft 365 administration scenarios, producing those scripts, doing those summarizations, researching how to do or how to configure something. The only thing you'll want to give thought to is the fourth column, the security and privacy. One of the big differences is with Microsoft Copilot, if you use the enterprise version, it is backed by a commercial data protection guarantee. And Microsoft is very clear about this, and we can include a link shortly here about this, but they guarantee that you own your data. It's not trained, your data is not used to train any large language model, and that data isn't subjected to any other service. It stays basically you own it, and there's no other eyes on it. The consumer version of Microsoft Copilot is very similar, but they do say that the prompts can be saved for so many days or for so many weeks. And if there are third-party connectors used in the Copilot experience, the data could be subjected to that. So net, from a privacy perspective, I would treat the consumer version just like you would treat whatever you enter in a public search engine. But do know that Microsoft is very clear that any prompts you provide, any data, is not used to train any large language model. Chat GPT by OpenAI is very similar, but there has been some cases, thankfully they're years old now, where prompts used by individuals, it did come out that data was used to train large language models, and it was essentially available to other users through the responses from prompts they used. So net, be careful entering sensitive data or data that you normally wouldn't want to leave your organizational boundary. I think that's a good summary of this slide. We'll leave it at that. I'll just call out the Azure OpenAI service, which we'll do a demo of later. But the really nice thing, since we're talking about security and privacy, is that any data you enter in that service is guaranteed to stay in the Azure subscription boundary. So it's all within your purview. Like no data ever leaves that boundary, which is a really nice guarantee. So with that, Habib, why don't you, since we're talking about security and privacy, talk a little more about what some of the concerns could be?
Yeah, so obviously, I think this is probably like one of the biggest topics from an organization perspective. As Curtis mentioned, there are a lot of privacy and security compliance things inside of M365, and obviously within the other LLMs. You want to just make sure that you're adhering to sort of what your company or organization security requirements are. So I think obviously the biggest risk is on the end user side, on what they're using these LLMs for, these these chatbots for, and the ones that they're actually using themselves. So, for instance, as he mentioned, using the Microsoft Copilot for Enterprise, which has the commercial data protection, it uses your Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD account, to authenticate you to the Copilot and then so that it knows to secure you as a commercial data protection. And then after that, it doesn't use your account after that. So any of the searches that you're doing and stuff that gets returned back to you is not actually tied to your user account. So the information and the prompts that you're actually using as well are only retained or cached for a very short period of time, just in order to perform the processing. So once the caching period runtime, I guess, times out, or you close your browser or you select new topic, then it resets that and it erases the cache. So it discards all the prompts and the responses that are there as well. And so, as he mentioned before, there are, some guarantees from a Azure OpenAI, obviously the commercial data protection. But again, from that side of things, your data is not used to train these models. Is obviously, I think, one of the biggest ones. Not used to train Azure OpenAI. Your data is your data. It does not leave the boundaries of your organization as well. And as I mentioned before, the user is really the big risk. So I think adoption and training is a very important factor or important item to include when you're going through your onboarding purposes or onboarding side of things when using Copilot and third-party applications, ensuring that they're not sharing any type of sensitive data within them. Obviously, the third-party ones more than the Microsoft ones, because they do have those guarantees in place. So as you can see here, some of the organizations that started using the Chat GPT one, such as Samsung. Samsung actually wanted its engineers to start using this tool, but they were actually pasting in problems to their source code, and so that you could actually search after that. Once they entered it in, the large language model got trained on the Samsung source code, so it would return the source code value. Same thing with Amazon. A lot of the employees were, searching for specific things based on internal corporate Amazon information. And then, Curtis and I could potentially search those items and it would return internal corporate data. So again, I think the biggest thing is to ensure, your employees are trained, obviously to ensure that they know where and what large language models to use. Anything else to add, Curtis, with that?
No, that was a really good summary. And I posted a link to the Microsoft Copilot commercial data protection, which describes exactly what their stance is in terms of who has access to that data. So you can review that. And there was a really good question in the chat about essentially where that data is processed from an AI perspective. And basically, the Microsoft AI processing engine, if you will, the services run in different Azure data centers. And there is another document, I'll try to find it, I should have actually had it available, which describes for your region which data centers are used. Because especially in the European Union, data sovereignty rules require that the data stays within certain boundaries. And Microsoft is very clear on which data centers are used within which geos. So we'll try to produce that.
Awesome. So next on, we'll move on to prompt engineering 101. And what is it? I mean, really, it's the ability to create an appropriate search or query or question to the LLM that will return an effective or an appropriate response. So just also a step back. So these LLMs do something that's called hallucination. So they want to make you happy and they want to basically respond to your query. And hallucination is nothing that I've come up with. It's an industry word that, that's used for when these LLM return incorrect or non-real information, right? So as I mentioned, they do like to make you happy, so they want to respond to you and give you a response. But some of these responses are going to be wrong. And even if you're using the Copilot for Microsoft 365, there's a little banner inside there that says, you know, hey, just make sure that you validate this information as well as it's creating it. So with that, because it does these things called hallucination, you want to do something that's called grounding, which will help try and reduce the amount of hallucination that is there. And grounding, what really means is just making sure that you're being very concise with your question or your prompt that you're creating, right? Make sure that it's relevant, use proper wording and context, you know, all of the little tips that we have there, provide specific conditions. So just as an example, in some of the demos that we're going to talk about, you know, you would say, let's say I want to create a PowerShell script that will create or give me like the last sign-in logs, you know, through M365. So you would say, you are a Microsoft 365 administrator, create me a PowerShell script that will give me the last 10 sign-in logs, and you can say for a specific person if you wanted, the last 10 sign-in logs, and then you can say, do not use, only use commands that are valid and relevant. Do not use any commands that are deprecated. And then it will try and reduce that as well. And you'll see the response, like it'll say, okay, let me try and do that for you. And as it basically takes your question and sort of converts it down into what it understands it needs to do, and then it'll go and fetch that information. So again, you know, these are, you know, the ability to create a really good prompt is going to be beneficial to you to get a better response back to you. I know, Curtis, you've been doing a lot of this, and you've been involved in a few hackathons as well. So, I mean, what other guidance do you have in this area?
Yeah, a couple of tips and tricks. So on the hallucination front, it is a very real thing. Sometimes it's amazing. The chatbot will actually just make stuff up. And here's one scenario I've experienced. If anyone has used the Microsoft database scripting language KQL, it's used for threat hunting and Defender. It's used for Microsoft ADX. It's very SQL-like. And I've had it produce KQL queries for me, which is really fantastic. It's boosted my ability to do a bunch of Microsoft ADX database stuff. But a couple of times, it's actually produced an incorrect script. And specifically, it's given me KQL operators that just didn't exist, which was really surprising and a bit baffling. One tip you can do when it does this is you can actually ask it why it chose that, in this case, that operator. And I did in this case, and it came back and it told me it's an SQL operator, not a KQL operator. So like Habib said, at a super high level, it's trying to give you an answer, trying to make you happy. And in doing so, it chose an SQL operator because I guess it didn't understand what the KQL operator is. So the tip there is you can actually ask it why it did certain things, and then you can actually tell it. In this case, I would say, do not use any SQL operators in the generation of the KQL script. So the more explicit you are, the more clear you are in your instructions, the better chance you have at not getting any hallucinations and getting correct answers. And as Habib said, in terms of grounding the chatbot, the more data you can provide to it is you're giving it the greatest chance of success of giving you something correct. And there's a prompt engineering technique. It's called few-shot learning. And that's basically where you provide examples of what you're trying to achieve, like successful examples, and the chatbot can learn from that. And again, that's where these tools for Microsoft 365 administration are really a lot better than the traditional Google search or Bing search, because you can give it the context. You can clarify what success means. And once it has that, then you can just, with prompts, ask it what you need. So I think that covers the prompt engineering. Let's just go shift gears into now you know the tools, now you know what the considerations are, you're ready to go. Let's just cover 3 important rules of the road before you get started. And I'm sure people on the call have experienced some of this already, but it's good just to review before you get started. Just to reiterate, we've discussed this in this presentation, but first and foremost, use these tools as an assistant, not like a carte blanche replacement of what you're going to do. They work really well at getting started or assisting you in summarizing, getting that first initial script generated. But do think of them as a co-pilot. The risk there is, if you just have them generate, a script fully right from scratch, it could have mistakes, could have some detrimental mistakes. It could be hallucinating, so you need to double check the work. Which is really point number 3 there, is be very explicit in your prompts, check and double check what it's returning. And Habib always has a good motto. It's like use gets before sets, specifically with scripting, right? So you want to go in read mode before you start setting or writing something from a scripting perspective. But really think about you're in read mode until you're absolutely certain that whatever's generated is what you want. And then the second bullet point there, just, we've reiterated throughout this presentation, just be really, really careful with sensitive data, things like personally identifiable information, PII. You'll want to be 100% certain that the tool you're using doesn't expose that data outside the boundaries of the tool, because that could land you in some hot water or some compliance problems, which you obviously don't want in your day-to-day administration. So with that, I think we've talked enough. Let's dive into some demos. What do you think, Habib?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so these are just example scenarios, sort of the art of what is possible. Habib and I have used these tools for many different scenarios, but we picked these 3 to demo. Basically, the first one, we're going to show how to use AI tools to generate a report which shows which guest users outside of your tenant have accessed or are registered in your Azure AD tenant. Of course, Azure AD is now renamed to Entra ID. And then looking at it from a security perspective, I'll demo using these tools to get more clarity around potential security risk from Microsoft 365 audit log entry. And lastly, if you're doing some PowerShell scripting, we'll quickly show how you can use these tools to transition your script from a PowerShell module that is being deprecated to the new Graph SDK. So Habib, why don't you tell us about the Azure AD guest user access report?
Yeah. So I think, obviously we just wanted to come up with a few different examples of how you can use, these AI and LLM. So the first one here that, I basically, as I mentioned, with regards to like the prompting, I'll just zoom in here a little bit for everyone to see. I want to sort of explain what we were talking about before from a prompt engineering, training it, saying that, you're a Microsoft 365 administrator. I want you to create a PowerShell script with valid and not deprecated commandlets. Include the PowerShell prerequisites and create an HTML report for, Azure AD guest users in their last login time. And then it says, okay, of all that text that I wrote, it says, I'm searching for a PowerShell script, create HTML report for Azure AD guest users and their last login date and time, generating answers for you. So then it came back and it generated this script, right? I know I think it's a little bit blurry on your end, but anyways, it was actually pretty good. So it did have a mistake in it, as we mentioned before. It does. It is going to have or make up some stuff or try and come up some stuff. So when I actually ran the script itself, there's the inside of the actual script here, the variable guest, the actual script itself, or the AI created as guest.userPrincipleName. But the actual value that I need to get using this get-azure AD default sign-in, logs, is .mail. So then it returns the value of the actual UPN of the user, and then the script was able to continue. So once it continued, I was able to then create the HTML report, and this is sort of what it looks like. So again, very easy. I didn't have to do much, right? From a starting point perspective, it was amazing because I was able to just go through and then troubleshoot the actual script itself, and then find out, sort of where the actual problem resided. So again, I think, as we mentioned, it provides a really, really good starting point from a scripting perspective, along with, other things as well, as I mentioned, inside of, Copilot for M365 as well, just from like an end user side of things. So I think, Curtis, if you want to show us your demo of the security Copilot side of things in Azure OpenAI.
Yeah, sure. Before we get started on that, Habib, what tool did you use to produce that? Was that Microsoft Copilot?
So this was Microsoft Copilot inside of the the chat window. It was Bing Enterprise at the time before it was renamed to Microsoft Copilot. So I just basically put it in the chat. Again, I tried to keep my prompt very concise as far as what I was wanting the LLM to do for me. And it did an amazing job, to provide me almost like a fully working script with literally just one variable I need to make a modification on was incredible. The amount of time that I would need to generate that script just manually would have been a lot longer than what it actually provided me.
And one thing I really liked what you did, if you just flip back to the original prompt that you gave Microsoft Copilot for a minute, you called out the fact that you wanted it to not use deprecated commandlets, and you specified you want it to include the PowerShell prerequisites. So I've had it generate PowerShell scripts many times, which have not worked because I didn't have the prerequisite modules available. Which, if it does that, you can actually just tell it to give you those prerequisite modules, but you included it right in the prompt, which is a really good thing to do.
Absolutely.
Very good. All right, we're going to shift gears now and do a demo of the Azure OpenAI service. And a lot of probably IT pros or sort of tenant administrators haven't seen Azure OpenAI. So as I mentioned, it's like every other Azure service available in an Azure subscription. So in my tenant, when you go to the Azure portal, you can go to the Azure OpenAI service, and like any other service, you have your controls along the left-hand side where you can lock it down, look at access control, cost analysis, networking, all that good stuff. But I'll draw your attention to the Azure OpenAI Studio. So that is where you will interact with, get a chatbot experience for the Azure OpenAI service. Now, at a high level, what you do is you provision an instance of Azure OpenAI. So now it's a service deployed in your Azure subscription. And then what you do is you deploy a large language model like GPT 3.5 or 4 into that service. And then what you can do when you launch Azure OpenAI Studio, which looks like this, you have a couple of different ways in the studio to interact with that large language model that you just deployed in the service. One is chat. So this is the chat playground where I can interact with that large language model that I just deployed in my Azure subscription. A few other experiences in the Azure OpenAI Studio. There's a DALL-E experience where you can give it prompts to generate with, experiment with image creation. And there's also a completions API, which is very much like the chat experience, but you can use it to do a summarization of text and those types of things. So in the chat playground, you can see in the far right, this is the configuration. So I've deployed Chat GPT 3.5 Turbo. It's sort of an enhanced version of GPT 3.5. It's good for a lot of everyday scenarios. And basically, the cost of deploying an LLM in your Azure service, it'll be a little more if you use the latest and greatest LLMs. They're a little more compute intensive, which incurs a little more cost. So I like this GPT 3.5 Turbo. Like I said, I've gotten really good results from it. So now that I've deployed the LLM in the service, I'll draw your attention to the system message. And what this is used is you can set up the instructions to the chatbot, give it the context of your scenario, and every time you send a prompt, it will include that system instruction to the LLM. So in this case, what I've done for this demo is I'm telling it, telling the bot that, hey, you're a Microsoft 365 security expert and you're a tenant administrator. And what I'm going to do is the text I include below, which will be in the prompt, I'm telling it is a Microsoft 365 tenant audit log entry that potentially looks risky to me from a security perspective, but I'm not a security expert. So I want the AI bot to analyze it and then tell me a couple of things. One, I'd like it to explain and summarize in just plain language what it means, and then also assess the security risk in terms of a potential breach or vulnerability or a known threat. And then lastly, I'd like it to provide the top 3 actions I should take to confirm whether this, is worth investigating further. So once I've set up the system message, basically in the middle here is where I can start chatting with my chatbot. So in this demo, what I'll do is I'll go to my audit log in my Microsoft 365 tenant, and you can see it's very noisy. There's basically whenever anything happens in my tenant, a user accesses a file, or if there's any system activity going on, it logs it here. And I draw your attention to this audit log because there's been several Microsoft 365 high-profile breaches which have been caught through audit log entries. So just scrolling through, I see one here. There's a service principal updating a group. That looks not too bad. If I scroll down, I see one here at the bottom where a service principal was added. So a service principal can be a very highly privileged identity in my tenant. So I'm interested in that. I'll click on it. And one of the challenges with the audit log is it's very detailed and hard to consume, especially if you're not a security expert. So you can see it's a bunch of details. It has a JSON representation of all the properties that were modified, who the actor was. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage the AI tool to just tell me in plain language what this is and whether I should be concerned about it. So I'll just literally do a carte blanche copy on that whole event. Then I'll go to my chat playground, and then I'll tell the chat AI bot, here's my audit log entry. And I'll literally just paste that right in the prompt, and then I'll send that off. So the chatbot is gone. It's investigated all the details of that event, and true to form, as I requested, it came back with a plain English response. And basically, it's telling me, hey, on March 17th, a service principal was added. It appears to be for SQL Copilot PPE. So right away, I feel a little bit better that I know that's a valid Copilot service that I was using in my tenant. And it tells me the principal ID associated with that service principal. And it's the second thing it's doing is, it's saying that this could mean an unauthorized person or process was used to add the service principal. Okay, so it's a potential vulnerability. And then it's giving me the top 3 actions I could take to follow this up if I wanted. So first, I could check if there's any unusual activity with this service principal. I could investigate the source that requested to add that service principal. And finally, I could verify that the service principal is added or legitimate. So what I like from a productivity perspective, which is what the session's all about, how to boost your productivity in M365 and security. Doing that initial analysis probably would have took me 15 to 20 minutes, but I used the AI tool, again, deployed in a Azure OpenAI service, so none of the data is leaving that boundary, and it gave me a really nice summary. And one of the big benefits here, again, of using an AI tool is now I can have a conversation with this context. So I could ask it questions like, how do I get the display name of the service principal? And it knows it from the audit log, but I could also say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is represents a big security breach, how would you rate this? So it's coming back, it rates it a 7 out of 10 based on, its all the knowledge it has in terms of security breaches. So it's 7 out of 10. That seems like something I would want to follow up with. And again, and we're running out of time, but you can just keep having that conversation, and you can even ask it how to take the actions which it represents. I have had other audit log entries where it was really good. It was hard to decipher, and it gave me clarity on the user taking the action, and I was able to do a little more follow-up. So just a really good tool to use to evaluate potential security risks and try to follow up on it. Any questions there, Habib, or comments?
Nope, all good. It's really cool, the ability that you have available to you to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I know, again, a lot of people haven't used Azure OpenAI Studio. That's why I really wanted to demo it, because I've been really happy with it. The learning curve is actually pretty minimal. And I'll just end the Azure OpenAI demo by saying what you can do in this studio is basically you can deploy this chat experience that you just did with the system message as an endpoint, which can be used as a web service. Which allows you to integrate it with other apps. You can develop a custom app to do this very thing, to analyze security incidences and investigate. Which, by the way, this isn't a replacement in any way, shape, or form of a proper security tool. I just wanted to demo, if you're an administrator and you're wondering if something's worth following up a bit more, you can do that. All right. So time check, we have 6 minutes left. Habib, do you just want to talk about the last demo we had where there was a deprecated PowerShell module? You could use AI to do that sort of transition to Graph SDK.
Yeah, I think it was just more about, again, showing sort of the art of what's possible, in the sense where if you have an existing, script that you want to obviously modify because, maybe Microsoft is deprecating some of the modules with regards to PowerShell and replacing them with Graph, that you want to use those, those large language models, or, Chat GPT or what have you, in order to, change the your script into like the new PowerShell SDK, Microsoft SDK. So we'd use Graph instead, and we would modify your script. So basically you would say like, hey, I have this PowerShell script. I want to convert it into a PowerShell Graph SDK, and then you would see that as well.
Yeah,
so then it was converted. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, specifically one good example, which is actually applicable to your Azure AD guest demo, is Microsoft has deprecated the MSOL, which is the PowerShell module used for Azure Active Directory. So you need to convert those commandlets to the Graph SDK. So what you can actually do is, like Habib could take his script, give it to the AI tool, and tell it to convert it to the Graph SDK, and it'll do that conversion for you. I think you've actually tried that, Habib. It had a few mistakes, but it was a huge benefit, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, like it's a good starting point. I think a lot of the times, depending on what your script does, like if we're doing a lot more script inside of Teams, it's interesting because it tends to return back values for just like regular standard Azure AD or Entra ID graph. So for instance, earlier I was saying like, hey, give me a PowerShell script, or I have this PowerShell script that does that gets the phone numbers that are assigned to the users inside of Microsoft Teams and convert it to the Graph SDK. But then when I did that, it gave me a Graph script that basically just went to Entra ID and pulled the telephone numbers back for those users. So again, it's not perfect, but it gives you a good starting point of somewhere that you need to go down to. If there's any more questions, please let us know. We just have a few minutes left.
Sounds good. And I think this is the next Tech Talk, right, Evan? It's scheduled.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you guys. That was a really great Tech Talk. So much good stuff in there. As you mentioned, this is the next Tech Talk. It'll be same place, same time next week. Ramiro and Jorge are going to be here.
Hey, Evan. This is Jason. There was a late question in here, and it wasn't to the speakers, but more or less possibly to you. Will you be putting the slides up that are presented today?
Let's see. I may need to lean on Katie for that.
Okay.
I know that we provide the recording, and I think that we can do the slides. We have occasionally in the past, so I'll make sure that we have that stuff available and make sure that Curtis and Habib are comfortable sharing that. But yeah, I think that should be fine. Yeah, thanks, Jason. I appreciate that.
Hey, Evan, this is Katie. I'm just jumping in. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. We don't typically share out the slides to everybody, but if you are interested in them, just send me over a quick email and I can share them with you. But the recording will be available for everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, and as you can see here, the big tech, as we call it, the in-person tech that we had last year in Atlanta was a huge success. So many great sessions, so many good conversations. So it was a big success, and along with that, the tech brand, the tech talks, we try to really keep it going throughout the year, so that there's so much more for all of you. And along with that, if we can go to the next slide, there we go. We've got this year's Big Tech coming up later in October 1st and 2nd in Dallas, Texas. And I know that internally, we've got a lot of people really excited about one of our keynotes this year. Andy Greenberg, who is a senior writer for Wired magazine. He also wrote the Sandworm book about the NotPetya attacks. So really, really exciting stuff. He's going to be there. But along with that, we also have a pre-con day before tech starts, where you can get hands-on training with some Quest products if there is anything that you are interested in. So with that, though, I think we can go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you all for being here. Curtis, Habib, thank you guys both. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. Really enjoyed it. And we'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.